Are you an entrepreneur that's ever stopped and wondered, like, how can I have my spouse be more supportive of the dream and the mission that I'm trying to build, or the vision, and just trying to get your spouse on the same page? Or you're the spouse going, what is my crazy significant other trying to do in building this business? On today's episode, we're going to dive deep, and we have a special guest who's going to share their insights as we built this organization, Master Networks. So come join us.
Get ready to improve your mindset, increase your skill set, and expand your network. Follow along as the CEO of Master Networks brings you over a decade of business networking experience. Welcome to Word of Mouth with Jaclyn Wilson. So there was actually something I did want to talk to you about before we really get into the episode with the guest and everything. Yeah. We, for the most part, know that you did real estate before starting Master Networks. Right. And I was just kind of hoping you could share with me the story of how that evolved. Did you always plan on being an entrepreneur, or was it something that kind of sprung from a previous job history?
Yeah, so I think the joke of being an entrepreneur is that, back in the, I don't know how many years ago, maybe 20, 30 years ago, being an entrepreneur wasn't cool. Mm-hmm. It's just, now it's become a cool word for,
everybody uses it.
Yeah. And maybe I'm not very employable, so I'm going to be an entrepreneur. I think a lot of people are like that. So I don't know. I think an entrepreneurial thing is more of a mindset than I'm deciding to be an entrepreneur. So I think a lot of people have that mindset, but then they've got to understand the steps to being successful. And I didn't. I just made a lot of mistakes early on and learned from those, hopefully. But yeah, it was not something that just you wake up one day and decide to do. It's just sort of the way you think, the way you're looking at things. And so I think from an early age, even in high school, I thought that way. Mm-hmm. I started looking at my time for $1, exchanging my time for $1. I would go work for something, say, all right, we're going to pay you $6 an hour, $7 an hour. I was like, who puts the worth on me that I'm $7 an hour?
I wish I'd had that mindset.
I don't know. That's just how I thought. And I would sit there I remember I had a job stocking shelves at the shoe store, and I remember putting shoes away thinking, okay, I've been here forever, and I just made $7. And then if you take out taxes and the gas to get there and all that stuff, you start going I made $4.50.
Yeah.
How many other things could I do and make?
This is what I'm
$5,
spending my time on.
Right. So I think those kinds of things in my mind is what sparked being an entrepreneur.
So where did Master Networks come in, and I guess that evolution of you growing to become the entrepreneur you are now?
Yeah, I really want to set the table, the context for something. So really understanding that in 2009, 10, for people who were in business back then, there's no way you don't remember it, because it was really difficult. The economy everything was booming. 2000 to 2008, it really was booming, and everything was moving, the economy, and then it started to go fast and down.
In the wrong direction.
Yeah, we'd over-leveraged people borrowing money, and so things started to get tight, and they couldn't spend anymore, and they'd over-leveraged, and so anyway, it started to get really tough. And in real estate, I was highly leveraged in real estate, mortgage, title, and kind of always feeling like things would be as good as they were. And so the economy was really tough, and had some challenges in business with partners and the business itself, and decided to step away from it. It was a really tough time of my life, setting the stage of where we were. But at that time, I realized it was my network that was helping me, and I saw an opportunity within networking. I had been part of a networking group for 10 years, and my wife and I just had our twins, which were our youngest two, numbers 4 and 5. And I missed a few meetings because of one of our boys had surgery. And anyway, I'd missed a few meetings. I get this letter that says, you've missed a few meetings, you're out. I thought after 10 years.
That was it?
Yeah, after 10 years. By the way, I started that group, had been the president twice over those 10 years. And then just get a letter that says, adios. No one reached out. No one connected with me.
That's ridiculous.
Well, it is, but it was also the rules, which I understood.
Yeah, I get that.
But what I realized was, if it's so transactional in nature, especially this economy at that time, what are we actually building? There's no relationships being built. we're not growing together. No one reached out, all of that kind of stuff. So in thinking about that idea, I came up with the concept of starting my own networking group, primarily to try to really save the real estate business at that time. Mm-hmm. And then it just sort of evolved and went quick. Gotcha.
So this might be a dumb question, but I'm assuming it was not always easy to start a business from scratch. Yeah. So a big part of probably what made it successful was the support system you had around you, which kind of is a great segue into our guest for today.
Yeah, absolutely. We should definitely get her insight into this process, because it was not, in fact, I would just say it was harder and difficult most of the time.
Yeah.
Not some of the time. Most of the time it was difficult.
I just didn't want to put words in your mouth.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. Yeah, so we're privileged today to have my partner in crime as we started this, my wife, Jaclyn Wilson. So welcome to the show. Yeah, glad you're here. The tell-all.
Tell more. Super excited to have you. But it's funny that he said partner in crime. So I'm just kind of curious. He gave us a little bit of a backstory on his path to becoming the CEO of and founder of Master Networks. So what was your side of that story?
Yeah, can you go there? Because it's probably like a repressed memory at this point when we started. It was a tough time.
It was a really hard time. Okay. It was a really hard time. We were probably experiencing the most financial difficulty we have ever experienced. And it was probably the longest period ever. You know, if you're scraping to be able to find money to buy groceries, and then you have a spouse that says, hey, I have this idea to start a business from scratch. Mm-hmm. You're like, awesome.
Good for you.
No sarcasm in that either, by the way. None.
And so it was scary. It really was. And I think the discussion at the end of the discussion was, well, you have 18 months.
Okay.
To make it work.
I feel like that's a very generous amount of time.
I thought at first it was 6 months, and then eventually it became 18 months. But I thought at first it was you have 6 months to make it work.
That's not enough time.
No, but it was hard. Like she was saying, you were talking about being hard, but I remember like paint the picture for everyone, how hard, because we just had the twins.
Yep.
So we had 5 children. The oldest was 7. Mm-hmm. We had 3 in diapers. Mm-hmm. It was no walk in the park. It was tough.
It was hard. I was mostly working night shifts so that I could be home during the day when the kids got home from school. We had actually 3 different daycare providers for the kids when they weren't in school. Because one didn't take infants. It was just one of those things where life was absolutely insanely chaotic.
It's one of those times where
impossible to balance, I'm sure.
It was.
Well, it's one of those times in life where we don't often mentally go back to, because it was so difficult. So to have this conversation is reliving those repressed memories and emotions of that time, because it was so difficult. She was talking about the daycare. So I'm trying to grow Master Networks in the mornings. If she's working a day, she was a nurse for 15 years. And so she would have early shifts. So I would get the kids up, go, and I'd drop at 3 daycares or 2 daycares in school or whatever it was at the time. And then try to work. And then I'd have to leave by 4 o'clock of the day just to get everybody picked up in an hour and a half at the different locations they were at. I mean, it was just there were days it was going through motions, a lot of days, just to survive. And I think a lot of people in business right now are in that same boat. And so I think it's important for us to set that stage, because so often you can look back or look at a business today and say, well, look where it is. No, if I could take you back to that day.
Yeah, look where we came from.
Right. And so it helps us relate and understand.
So with you saying he had 18 months, did he hit that?
Tell the truth.
Tell more episodes.
There was progress. And so that's all that I think that really
there was progress.
There was progress. And so I think the vision was where Master Networks could be. And so really it was the network of people that we had been introduced to. Mm-hmm. And so along with their help and their visions and just that thought of being able to see what could possibly be at that point,
right.
And the promise, I think is what it really was where at that 18-month point gave us hope.
Okay. Gotcha.
And I think
something to look at for the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Part of it was I tried to communicate where we were at as often as possible without trying to overwhelm her like with all the details and nuances of the business, but try to help her understand and see a vision of where we were and where we were going and what progress was being made. But an advice I would give to an entrepreneur who's trying in that moment, there were times, and we didn't do it right all the time. There were times we did it well, where we would communicate. And then there was times where I might, like in my excitement to help her see where we're at, I'm pushing that vision really hard at her. Mm-hmm. Because it's like, oh, we're making progress. I need you to see this. I want you to see this, where we're at. And she's just like, look, we're trying to survive. We got 5 kids. And so sometimes I think the mistake an entrepreneur makes is they either don't communicate at all with their spouse, or they try to like, why won't my spouse see exactly what's going on where we're at? And I went through that. I still remember a real estate back in, I don't remember when it was, but I did this real estate investment workshop, and I remember teaching it, and we did like a Q&A at the end, and Jaclyn was there, and she took the mic at the end, and she said, oh, I finally get some of what you're saying. Not that she didn't understand the like knowledge of it.
Gotcha.
She understood a little bit more of some of the things I was saying, and that actually helped me understand her perspective. And understanding that your differences are okay. Like, it's okay that we don't see it the same way, and not trying to force that. So that's just a really important part about the communication piece during that. Because if you're not telling your spouse what's going on, how can you expect them to be supportive? Right. And at the same token, if you're like, well, let me tell you, we balanced the books today, and we did this, and this is what our tax return looked at. Like,
we don't care.
They don't care.
It's like, right? That's over my head.
Right.
So,
especially when you're trying to survive. Do we just have money to pay groceries? Like,
right. Because you've got this big picture in your head about where you're going and what this could be. But at the same time, there's the day-to-day that you're just like, all right, but what do we have coming in right now?
Yeah.
Well, and again, relating it to a lot of the business owners today, a lot of people are just in survival mode. Mm-hmm. You know, and that's where we were, is just trying our hardest just to survive.
Yeah.
And being able to be open and have that open line of communication, but yet keeping it on a level where your other spouse can just understand and, you know, be relatable. Yeah. But yet at the same time, having that business owner spouse be able to understand that other spouse needing parameters,
mm-hmm.
you know, within that business, and setting that, I don't want to say limitations, but a parameter of where that other spouse feels comfortable.
Yeah, setting your boundaries.
Yeah.
I gotcha. So, what were some of the parameters that you had set?
18 months.
18 months. Was there anything else that went with it? I mean, like the open communication.
Can I just say something about the 18 months, though? So there's an interesting part of this, and I hope the entrepreneurs that are listening understand this key point. Because I think sometimes it's easy to say, and I've been in these coaching sessions too, they say, well, you know, it doesn't matter, husband, wife, whoever the entrepreneur is saying, my spouse isn't supporting the mission that I'm on and all this stuff. But here's an interesting thing. And she joked about it, and I said, be honest. But she said there was progress. Mm-hmm. That, I think, is one of the keys. Like, I often will tell the entrepreneur in the coaching session, be honest with yourself. Are you making progress? Are you being honest about the progress being made?
Okay.
Because I think one of the biggest challenges is, okay, so she says 18 months. Let's see, you know, a benchmark of this. It'd be really easy for me to say, yeah, we're getting there, and we're not making progress.
Right.
Because I know entrepreneurs that they go to work each day, or they go to an office, or they're busy, but they're not making progress. They're not actually moving the needle at all. Mm-hmm. And so I think what happens is you start to lie to yourself. And when you lie to yourself, then sort of a way you're lying to your spouse about the progress being made. And so you have to be accountable for those results. That's probably one of the biggest things that I see when a spouse is like, oh, when are we going to finally get paid? Or when are we going to make some money? Well, it's right around the corner. Okay, but let's just get real about what are you actually doing to make that happen?
And I don't think there's anything malicious in it. It's just kind of a blind optimism they don't realize.
Oh, yeah.
And then, it goes in the wrong direction.
Exactly. Just being honest about it, I guess, was the point I was making in that benchmark.
Right.
So parameters, sorry.
Any other parameters?
No, that's fine. No. I'm trying to think back to conversations we had, and there's none that specifically come to mind, but just that open honesty of where you're at, and being like, okay, well, this is where we're at, and, this is where we need to go. And if we're not there, then, okay, this is what we need to do. And I think a lot of times you would kind of talk things out with me, whether or not you took my advice, is either here nor there. But, I think it is important sometimes to have those conversations with the spouse, saying, hey, what is your opinion?
Yeah, truly making them that
making
partner
them
in crime.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of just a passenger.
Yeah, I mean, I think I took your advice more than you remember, but it's hard because, I want that input, but I also understand she's giving input from a limited amount of information that's unfair. There was times it was unfair for me to put her in that position to ask for that advice because she's not in it every day, right? So I'm giving her like this bit of information to try to help me walk through and make a decision. That's just tough. I mean, it doesn't matter what your business or non, right? Like, so, it's just, it's a hard time. Like thinking back, we've often talked about it was like the 2 hardest years of our marriage too. Like just because of the stress of everything, like little kids, she's working, I'm trying to launch a business. I mean, if you think about the economic pressure, I mean, if you look at like just statistically divorce, economics, right?
Right.
One of the biggest determiners of that. And we are now we went from 3 to 5 kids. We lost a business. We're launching a new business. And then after a few years, we decided to move. Moving is also one of the most stressful things possible. So like, kind of looked at it like if we could get through all of that, we could get through a lot of things together. And I think that's the key too, is like, don't try to force your spouse to be supportive. Be the supportive spouse, and then they decide or not. Like, you can't force anyone anyway. Like, and I think I tried to I wouldn't say force at the beginning, but I was a little bit more.
Was it force?
Perhaps. I don't know if I'd say force, but I think at that point there really wasn't much of an option. It was more of like, this has to work.
Yeah.
I think for both of us. So I don't know if it was.
That's a good point. Like when it has to work.
It has to, like, there was no other option. Like that was it, or.
Boy, that could be a whole nother topic for a podcast.
I was about to say, do you feel like that was the best motivator?
Backs up
I
against
do.
the wall.
You
like,
don't have a choice at that point.
Yeah, it's kind of the mantra of what some people call the burn the ships.
Yes.
The story, although I've heard it's not actually true, but it's a great story, is that Cortez, he brings his troops and they land and they're going to go to battle, and he orders his whole crew to burn the ships. And they're like, what? Yeah, because when you burn the ships, there's no exit strategy.
Right, no retreat.
You're going to conquer this island or you get conquered. That's it. And I think in business, many people kind of tiptoe in. They go, well, I'm going to keep my job. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Like, everyone has to make their own decision. But for us, we were forced to just go all in.
Yeah.
And as hard as that was, I wouldn't change that. That's the other part of it we've talked about. Like, would you change what we went through to get what we are? I mean, there's parts of it. Okay, never mind.
Well, and you remember it as 2 years. I remember it as like
5,
7.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But seriously, I don't know that I'd ever change the lessons that we learned, because there were some really powerful and good lessons that came from it. Not just business lessons, but life lessons, marriage lessons, family, you know, all of those types of things. So
that's a good point.
I don't think I'd necessarily change it.
I sure wouldn't want to go through it again.
I know.
No, I
Definitely not want to go through it.
I mean, there was really hard conversations back and forth. Tough financial decisions. Like, I mean, there were days it was like, how do we pay the groceries tomorrow? Like, how do we get through today? And it was day to day many times.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, what's fascinating too is, and so I have such a heart for that. I think we both do, for families and entrepreneurs and stuff that are going through this, which is why we're driven to help, because we do know, like I don't know that everyone who's part of Master Networks understands that. Like, we do know it wasn't that long ago. Like, that's what sometimes, you know, we just built a house 2 years ago, and it was such a, like, for both of us, for different reasons, it was such a, like, monumental thing for both of us. And again, for different reasons, but it was like the symbolism for me that, like, we'd accomplished something that 5 years prior, we weren't even sure we were going to keep the house we were in. You know what I mean? So, like, we get it, but I just wouldn't want to go through it again.
Well, they say hindsight's 20/20, but the only reason it is because you've learned from that mistake.
Right.
So,
well, that's the hope. I'm not sure every entrepreneur does. I mean, unfortunately, you know, we know people, we've been friends with people who that business challenge has actually created that wedge, and, you know, it can tear a family apart. It can tear it can bring a business down. And so,
you can't just be the blind optimist. You know what I mean? Like,
it's a good point.
You have to be a realist at times. You know, have that perspective of optimism, like, you know, but just can't be blind about it. You have to really take to heart what's really truly going on and learn those lessons and try to fix them, and look to others who have been where you want to be,
right?
Or where they are where you want to be. And so try to learn from them. You know, hey, what are you doing? Because I want to be there. And again, be open with your spouse. Like, hey, I'm trying to do the best I can. This is where I want to be. This is where we're going. And I might have made mistakes, but, you know, I'm trying to learn from them, and I'm not going to make them again. Those types of things.
Right. It's progress on a different level.
And I think there's another side too. And I'll just take, obviously for obvious reasons, I'll take the husband spouse side, who's the entrepreneur in this. There's a component there that I think, at least for me, that was really glaring. It felt every day looking in the mirror, was like, you know, I'm a husband and a father and a provider, and I can't fail. Like, it felt, and I don't mean this lightly, but it felt like life and death some days. Like, it felt like I can't fail. And so when the business pressures around are like, this person hasn't committed to buying a region, or this person hasn't committed to becoming a member, those pressures of, like, going home, knowing that weight is on you, even though it wasn't solely on me. Like, she was working, we were in it together, but it just feels that way. I feel a sense of that with husbands who have that sense that they have to do this kind of thing. And I think the mistake that I made many times was trying to do it by myself. To your point about people who've been there, like, find mentors, find people who've been through it. Fortunately, we were blessed that I did. And it wasn't by accident, but it sort of aligned.
I gotcha.
Right?
Yeah.
But that was so key, is like, you can't keep it bottled up, and you can't do it by yourself. People have gone through it. Reach out.
Well, the thing is, too, is that I think for both spouses, those struggles can feel extremely isolating.
Yes. Right. For you too.
For each other. Yeah, exactly. Each person feels extremely isolated in their own personal struggle.
Right.
And they feel like they're doing it alone, because a lot of times they just don't feel like they can share in their own, because this other person over here, like me in the healthcare, I don't understand necessarily the whole business entrepreneurial world. And so that's isolating. And then he over here, who's trying to build a business and understands the whole entrepreneurial business world, and has his own failures and successes, and all of that kind of by himself is isolating. And so as much as you try to share in those things, sometimes you just don't always connect at the same level.
Does that open communication help alleviate some of that? Or is that kind of its own issue, like on its
It does. You have to really work at it because it can become its own issue.
Right.
For sure. And I think that that's a lot of times what a lot of entrepreneurials and their spouses, that's the struggle. You have to really, really work hard at it.
Because I don't think it felt like it was years later that we both realized how isolating it was for each other. Like, do you know what I mean? Like, I knew it was isolating for me, but I didn't realize how isolating it was and how difficult it was for her. And I think she didn't quite realize. She knew it was tough for her, but did she realize how tough it was for me? And it wasn't until years later when actually we felt like things were a little more stable and we started having conversations about, hey, back when we started this, and kind of like, oh, it was just like we shared things with each other, that moments that we remembered and go, wow, that was really, I didn't realize it was as hard for you at that time as because maybe you didn't let on or whatever.
Yeah. Well, even in that survival mode, sometimes you just have to compartmentalize things, because you are just trying to survive. And so like you have these pieces, and then all of a sudden, sometimes there's those breakdowns. Because again, you're by yourself in your own mind, so. But
the problem with that, just and it sounds like more therapy than business talk. Like,
word of mouth.
This is like, yes.
None of us are licensed.
By the way, we don't pretend to have it all figured out either. So.
No.
But the one thing that I think happens though is when you do isolate like that, like you end up naturally, I think you end up putting up the moat, the wall, as a protective mechanism, because you're like, I'm in this by myself. So if I'm in this by myself, I better fortify my wall around me. And that, I think there was, and there's not like a specific moment, but there probably was, but it feels like then there was like all of a sudden one day we looked up and went, like, I have this isolated moat over here and you have one over there. Does that mean we're at war with each other? It's like, we weren't, but it kind of felt that way because I'm isolating, she's isolating to just like do this and survive. And that's like, looking back, that's a mistake. Again, it's a lesson we learned through it, but
sure.
But it was probably.
But at least you reached that realization eventually, and you could have that debrief kind of to move forward from it.
Yeah. Debrief is probably not quite the.
No, it's a very
technical,
tame, very optimistic term, but.
So, but there was some fun in it too. This is, I don't want this message to feel so heavy. Like.
No, well, and then in the whole supporting of being able to reach your business goals and dreams, we realize that we are truly on the same page together because we want the business to be successful, and there's a lot of give and take from both of us. And I think along the way too, it wasn't just like, okay, we have these walls and, nothing's working, but we made it work. Both of us did the same give and take and did what we had to make both of us successful in our various careers and family and all whatnot. And I think when the opportunity presented itself to move to Texas and have Master Networks be, the sole income provider and things like that, to where it was actually reaching the pivotal point where the growth was booming, and the dream or the goal was finally being achieved. I think that was the ultimate sacrifice and support that I had to give to make that as a spouse successful for the entrepreneurial husbands.
But the move was joint, achieved. By the way. Like,
it
we
was.
Were both all
it
in
absolutely
on the move.
Was. It absolutely was. I was excited to be able to have the opportunity for our family to, be able to come down here. And I saw it as a successful move for our kids and all the opportunities that they had down here, not just for the business, but for our whole entire family. But
that's something we always did, was always involve our kids in the discussions too. So like I remember we had set, when we were talking about moving and relocating the company, which again, we had family and some that were like, what, you're moving? So, but we knew we had to expand. So we knew we had to, but I remember we had set a goal. We said, when we hit 1,000 members, we're going to probably move to Texas. Now, we'd already put everything in motion.
Yeah.
But it was sort of that goal for us. Like, when we hit 1,000, we're going to move. And I'll never forget sitting at the table at dinner with all the kids. And I'm sitting at the end of the table. And my son, my oldest, is sitting at the other end of the table. And he said, hey, Dad, how many members do we have? And I remember what struck me about that was, how many members do we have? You know, from 15-year-old, 14-year-old.
I don't even know. I don't even think he was that 13.
Well, we've been here 5 years, so yeah, something like 14 years old, maybe. 14. To say, how many members do we have? And I remember that just struck me like, wow, they all see it as something they're a part of, whether they contribute to it or not. This is their life too,
right?
With it, and
it becomes a lifestyle.
Yeah,
really, it does.
And we've always been intentional about including not just a spouse, but our kids in the business,
and even from such a young age.
Yeah. Braden getting on stage at 10 years old and pitching his notes with No, it's been a journey for sure.
So has it gotten easier?
Yes, because I
was surprised it took you that long to answer that.
Well, I mean, I just have that expectation of I don't want to say just having you do what you always do, but that's kind of what it is. I mean, it's just being able to be like, okay, you know,
there's less of the tactical discussions that we had at the beginning of like, we're going to do this and we're going to do that. There's less of that for sure. Because there's a trust there now. And I think that goes back to every relationship is trust. And that's why I said at the beginning, if you're the entrepreneur and you're trying to communicate and get your spouse to be supportive, but you're not doing the things every day to move the needle, you're lying. You're not being truthful. And so you've got to be truthful in those activities. And so I think now there's a level of trust, like, now we have more history on the other side than we had on the backside of trying to get it figured out.
Once you have those goals and those goals have been achieved, you know, and you've seen those stepping stones being hit, I think that it becomes much easier for, I think, that spouse to be able to say like, okay, you know, like, I think we're good.
Now that being said, this has probably been the most stressful year that we've had in the last 4 or 5 years.
I can imagine.
With COVID and everything else going on, it's been a tough year.
Well, we're so glad you were here with us. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks for coming in and sharing the kind of the backstory of that. Is there any other thoughts you have that advice you would give to, you know, whether it be the entrepreneur or the spouse, in trying to come together to build a business?
I would just say, just to reiterate, the communication and the just coming together and understanding the parameters that actually each spouse probably has, understanding the goals, and then probably the limitation in the thinking that the spouse probably has, and just understanding each other.
Probably coming to terms on agreements of what needs to have instead of the expectations. Because I think when those are not discussed, you put an expectation on the other person, both sides.
It's an assumption,
Yeah, and just coming to agreements of like, okay, 18 months. And I wouldn't say, like, just to clarify too, that anyone was listening to that piece, I don't want it to sound like, because I don't think it was an ultimatum, like it wasn't like 18 months or else.
Right, no.
But it was a pretty hard line, like we need to see progress within this period of time.
Otherwise, there has to be a really hard discussion.
Yeah.
That needs to be had.
At least you set the expectation up front.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So good, great insights. I mean, what a powerful thought to go back. And again, I wasn't sure we were going to go to the heaviness or the deepness of some of the places we went because they're like repressed memories, but I'm glad we went there.
The therapy's been had for the...
There's nothing wrong with talking about the heaviness because that's what nobody talks about.
Yeah.
Nobody wants to.
Everybody thinks it's easy, like overnight success. Like, all of a sudden you see these millionaires that pop up all over the place and you're just like, oh, well,
One of my most
it
hated
doesn't
phrases
happen.
is all of a sudden.
Yeah.
There's really no such thing as like,
No,
all
it
of a sudden,
happen.
I started making money. Nah,
No.
I doubt it. Right?
It takes a work and it takes time.
It does.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your insights today.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely. It's fun.
So, an honor, obviously, to have my wife be on the show and be part of it. It was good to go back and relive, some of those thoughts and memories of how we started. I think in business and in life, really, no matter what you do, everyone wants a supportive spouse or significant other in what they do. They want them cheerleading them on, and I think that's important. But as an entrepreneur, I think it's highly significant that you go out and you look for a network for support as well. Because in those moments, as I described and my wife described, where we felt isolated, it was also important for me to have a network of people that could support me in a moment or add to my business or whatever it might be. And I think that often gets lost.
Agreed. And I think the biggest takeaway I had from that conversation was that it really relies on a foundation of trust. And whether it takes time to build that trust or it's just already there, I think that's the biggest common denominator for all entrepreneurs.
Yeah. I mean, it's tough to build a business in isolation. We've been saying that for years. We just demonstrated that through our conversation. So for those listening today that you don't want to build a business in isolation, come join us at Master Networks. Go to masternetworks.com, look for a chapter nearby you to plug in and get connected to people who can support you, who've been where you've been or where you are now today and can help you get through those tough times. Because, again, I don't know what the economy is going to look like in the future. And it could be very much like, it could be very much like 2008,
You just have
2009.
to prepare.
Yeah, and one of the best ways is to support yourself with a network for sure.
Well, our producer, Katie, I believe, has a random question for us.
Random question time.
I'm actually kind of scared.
We should get music for random questions.
We really should.
Okay, the question for today is, which book has influenced you the most and why?
Oh.
Ladies first.
Oh, gosh. Okay, so most of the books I read are like fiction, so I feel like it's not anything that like helped me build like my professional career or anything. It was more like personal growth through living through a character, but I don't know what book. There are so many, and I can't.
You can't get off this episode.
No, I can't. I can't even pick favorites. Like I have lists of things, so I don't know. I feel like my personality or who I am is just an amalgamation of all these different lives I've lived through the different stories that I've consumed over my years.
Okay, so I'll give two. Maybe I'll give you one. So like, thinking two because different parts of my life. So I'm a religious, spiritual person. So of course, Scripture, Bible's very important. But second, probably the most impactful book because of the time at which I read it and how impactful it was there was a book that Robert Kiyosaki wrote called Cash Flow Quadrant. And I think it really, for the first time, opened my mind up to understanding the path of how money worked and assets and liabilities for the first time. And like realizing I was never taught that stuff in school, not the way that he teaches it. And so that was really impactful and really changed the trajectory of how I managed and looked at business and finances and every bit of it. So
when did you read that book?
Oh man, probably like 2003 or 4, probably somewhere in there. Yeah, so pretty early on in my business career, made a big difference. So
Awesome.
Okay, good question today.
That was really good.
Deep, and she used the word amalgamation, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh,
Can you
no,
use it
I'm
in a
not.
sentence other than what you did?
I was about to say, I think I just
Origin
did.
of meaning?
Amalgamation.
Yeah.
No, I have no idea how it's spelled. Next week on Word of Mouth.
We're gonna do video because it's just that important.
YouTube is the second largest search engine in the world.
Marketing is a long game. It's not a short game.
When I started doing YouTube, I just wanted to communicate with my customers. Later, I wanted to be the best plumbing YouTube channel.